Coach Massey here from M2 Speed, Strength and Performance, Massey Machado Strength and Conditioning, with another episode of Move Your Feet. And if you remember in the last episode, we actually touched upon the Active 90-90. It was sort of a warm-up movement prep, and you guys can go back to that. But during that episode, I mentioned 3 phases or 3 frames of reference for movement prep that, in our opinion, are very important. So the first frame was activation. The second frame was engagement. The third frame was ignition. And I gave a brief demonstration of that. But before we get to that, I just want to let you know, a lot of people wrote some very nice emails about that movement itself and also asked for some demonstrations and a little bit more explanation. I also got an email from a PhD, who will remain nameless, who kind of very playfully engages with me. It said, "Coach Massey, I certainly like what you do, but I'm not going back to, or am I supposed to go back to, the proverbial drawing board? I think you made it more complicated than necessary." I've been accused of that. "And your videos are way too long, but I'll stay tuned." That's all I ask. Stay tuned. Understand we don't have all the answers, but we most certainly will provoke thought. So we were talking about 3 frames of movement prep. Before you go from that static, unprepared state till running at full throttle. We talked about activation, frame 1, engagement, frame 2, ignition, frame 3. I'm going to call in Coach Matt, and he's going to assume the position, and we're going to give a little demonstration and analogy. Slide back this way so we stay on frame. All right, so one of the best analogies is sort of thinking about your body being at rest. Initially, you just want to let it know that something's about to happen. That would be the activation phase. That's when somebody would come in and say, "Hey Matt, it's time to get up. Just be aware you got to get up." So you acknowledge me, your body, your anatomical components, neuromuscular system. It's kind of being made aware it's time to get activated. That's our frame 1. Frame 2 would be more like engagement. I need to engage the subject now. "Matt, come on, bud. I woke you up a couple of times. Could you please get up, swing your legs over the bed, and boom." So it's sort of like the engagement part is, he now knows he needs to get into position to do something. He's engaged. He swung his legs over the bed, and he's kind of getting ready to go. And then frame 3 would be that actual ignition where we say, "Okay, time to get the full throttle." And boom! There he goes. He's ready to go. In any event, just a little analogy. But for today, we are going to talk solely about activation. And Matt, you can stay here. We think that movement prep has been very simple, which is good, but in our methodology and our system, you can come this way. We actually look at those 3 frames. And look, I'm not your daddy. Well, I'm his daddy. But I'm not your daddy. I'm just here to provoke thought. I love when you guys email, because I don't remember to say everything on camera. This is completely unedited and completely unrehearsed. So we just kind of take it and kind of go through the motions in trying to elicit some forum type discussion. So anyway, in our opinion, the 3 frames are addressing the musculoskeletal activations, engagement and ignition, the neuromuscular activation, engagement and ignition, and just trying to go from static, rev up the RPMs, and they get to full throttle, because training sessions should be able to go at full throttle if necessary. So some of the viewers actually asked for illustrations, demonstrations, examples of some of the movement prep that we do strictly from an activation standpoint. Now, I will say this. In our opinion, foam rolling, trigger point, and raising the tissue temperature in general is part of the activation phase, or the activation frame. And you know what that is. I don't have to show you how to foam roll. I don't have to show you how to use a lacrosse ball or other peripherals to actually get into tissue temperature and to get into trigger points. There's plenty of videos out there, and if we keep getting drugged back into mobility, how, I don't know, but there are like some super studs out there, girls and guys who make their living on mobility, and we're going to let them handle that. So just understand, in our opinion, that foam rolling, trigger point, tissue temperature is basically part of the activation phase. And then you guys know about static, meaning you're not really moving your feet much, there's no dynamic movement, but like some static band activations. It's called a band activation. You're not thoroughly ranging, but you have the band. So in our opinion, the activation phase has that trigger point, foam rolling, raising of the tissue temperature. It could be like a static mode, and then obviously you're going to have a static with a little resistance added, and that's sort of where the meat and potatoes for us comes in. During our activation phase, we like to have something that's static, but it also addresses postural concerns, cueing and corrections, and the trunk-torso relationship, how your trunk relates to your upper and lower extremities. We don't really use the term core much because an apple has a core, and if you try to put that against Maddie's body, the core is very, very, very small, and he has a trunk, torso, and the way it interrelates to his extremities is very important to us, especially when you start getting up to full throttle in whatever movements you're doing, whether it's Olympic movements, whether it's agility, speed. You really have to understand the trunk-torso relationship and how it's really correlated to your upper and lower extremities. And we're just going to give you a couple of quick examples of what we go through as part of our activation phase. Phase 1, activations. Second phase would be engagement. Third phase would be ignition. We're on activation. Just walked in the room. Just got shaken to wake up. Okay? So Maddie, why don't you grab Perform Better mini bands. Everybody's got mini bands. He's going to put it lateral malleus. Fancy word, right? Put them at the ankles. So he's going to put it at the ankles. We're going to stay back just where you are, Matt. This way we stay in frame. And we're going to do a movement. It's we call it a sumo movement. So he has the band down there near his ankles. And this is really cool to take a look at your client or athlete, because when you instruct them on hips down, hips back, good tall chest, no kyphosis, no rounding, you're going to start to look at a few things. I'm just going to tell them, hey look, Matt, start at a pretty well power pillar. Good, pretty parallel stance. You're going to flex ankles, knees, and hips. He's going to be bent, he's going to be fresh. And all I'm going to ask him to do is go in a half moon position and drop the leg with control. Okay, good. Now back in. Good. Now I'm going to tell him, do me a favor. Go a little higher, because when you come a little higher, you'll see that the client or athlete has a tendency to do this. They roll into that side, or they flex this way laterally into the opposite side that they're moving. And we are teaching in our movements, in our speed and agility, man, know where vertical is, know where plumb is. It's hugely important not to get beat in a lot of our sports. So I'm going to say, look, Matt, do me a favor. Let's try to stay tall. Let's try to stay vertical. Let's go with that half moon, but let's try to really fight to brace at our obliques to make sure we don't flex laterally. It's tough. Go ahead. Up. Good. And back in. Okay. A little higher now. Up and down. Good. And back in. This is where you start talking to the client. Postural corrections, activation phase, making sure they're getting prepped for a great engagement phase. So turn, let's go sagittal sideways. Perfect. So once again, Matt bends down. Here's what I'm looking for now. I don't want to see all sorts of wacky cervical extension. I want to see a good neutral spine, good neutral here, nice and flat. He's got kind of a beefy back, so you don't know what's going on really, if it's kyphosis or not. And then you're just going to have him perform that movement. This is out and then back in. Now, I'm going to turn you just a hair because of the way the camera's angled. Boom. Now, sit back, sit down. And I like that he has his fingers cueing in his hips or near his SI, near his flexors, because he can get a real feel for that movement. And he's also going to be able to cue whether or not he's got that lateral flexion, and he'll feel it himself. Manny, let's go. Left leg out, half moon. left leg back, boom, and rest. So in the absence of the band, that movement sort of looks like you pick this leg up, half moon. It looks simple, but what you really want to do is you inherently have this need to just go and get your foot down quick. And that's part of some of the agility stuff we do, up, down, quick. But for this, because we're trying to get postural efficacy and we're trying to get good trunk activation, we're going to actually take our time where we got to bear down on the oblique and we got to pick up and put down rather slowly. It's even tough to do without the band. It seems so stupid, so simple. Sure, I didn't invent it, but in any event, it's a really good movement where you're coaching and cueing. In our opinion, instilling postural efficacy, trunk torso participation is really beginning right in that activation phase before we even get to engagement, dynamic warm-up, any of that stuff. So I'd like to also demonstrate another movement prep that we do here. It's basically a variation of this, but now we're going to have sort of an oppositional force kind of force us to stay along our frontal plane while breaking our sagittal plane. And for that, so we're gonna go on to super bands, right? Yep. So we'll go on to super bands. Take your super band. It's usually better when somebody has shorts on because the skin kind of adheres to the band. Now, if you have hairy legs, yeah, it sucks, but no worries on that. So we're going to take the band and we're actually going to feed it inside of that. We're going to go like this. So if I'm going to be pulling, so you're on that side? Okay. So if I'm going to be pulling to my left, or my anchor hand is going to be like my left, I'm going to feed it under and through, like so. Okay? I'm going to try to get it superior patella, inferior patella like that, and I'm also going to try to feed it around me a little bit. So it's sort of threaded here. Yank that down, make sure you have good contact points. And he's going to do the same thing here. If this is going to run on your client, just pull it down a little bit. You tell him, okay, start with a soft hand. So we're soft. There's a little slack in the band. So a little slack in the band, Maddie. Then what you're going to have him do is you're going to have him punch out first, right along the clock. Now, he's along his frontal plane. Make sure he's not breaking that frontal plane too much. And this is when you tell him, anchor hand stays in place. They're floating in the air. Already, you got trunk torso engagement. Now you do that little half moon, drop. And see, watch the angles. If he opens too much, you tell him too wide, your knees are tracking too far out, try to be back at the frame a little bit, and then back in. Boom. So you're going to tell that client, start a little closer, okay? Start a little closer, a little more narrow power pedal. Now, the hand comes out. Punch, hold it, hips, cue, up, down. Try to keep those toes, right? So I'm going back in. Let's hold it. Out, and then back in. You can make the sounds. It's good. Now, to basically progress that a little bit, simple stuff. You keep the slack on the band. Boom. Slack, little slack. As you make the movement and you step out in that half moon to sumo landing, you're going to punch out. You're going to have some really nice cross oppositional tension to get the obliques engaged, trunk torso. And now, because you've progressed it a bit, you're going to see if you observe kyphosis occurring. You're going to see if you see people bailing out at their hinge, taking their chest too far forward, getting into anterior tilt. I know it sounds like a lot, but even putting all of this together in our activation, eventual engagement, eventual ignition protocol, what do we, 8 minutes, soup to nuts maybe, sometimes 10, and you get a better session. Okay, so on this one I say, you only punch out as you step. Good, and we got to remember the half moon because I didn't do it, okay? And I got to remember to punch out. So it's punch down, then as we come back in, we release the tension. Got it? Perfect. Now what's pretty nifty about this, we're going to take this, if you see people are kind of struggling with this, the beauty of this movement is you can take it, and all you got to do now is drop them down. They keep it in the same position. Okay, now Maddie, you look back at me, because I want everybody to understand something. Maddie did not get a heads up on any of this. So Matt, slide towards me. and slide back because I don't want you going off frame. Perfect. So I have one position on the camera, your position is good. So you're going to tell your client, we're talking about a diagonal. Now here's where you can break rank a little bit. You're going to take the back leg and you're going to use it as your anchor point and slide it out. Now, you're not going to make it so grossly rotated. That's a completely different movement. That's where you might use this anchor point and do this type of thing, which is wonderful. But for here, just take it and drop it back as an anchor point. Once you have it drop back as an anchor point, now you can literally take this band in, pull it in, Maddie, and now you're just going to drive away diagonally and hold it to activate the trunk. Light touchdown, eccentric control. And then we push up diagonally, come back, nice and easy. You can change the path of travel a bit out here, but you really don't get the same degree of the trunk torso activation as when you use the anchor point diagonally, point to point, and you tell them bear down, bite down, make it feel like you're almost taking a poop, and then bring it back in. Boom. So that's a good activation. If you want to add a little gusto to it, 9 out of 10 times we're going to have this slippage, but you can take that back leg, go back to tabletop crawl position, quadruped, and then you can just drive both out at the same time. It's a very inexpensive means to this activation as far as the band goes. And the reason I say it's inexpensive, Maddie, let's give them a little shot of this. I'll do it first, and then you could demo it while I call it. Remember, we're in the activation phase still, kind of static, maybe pseudo-dynamic, I don't think so. We're just trying to get all this correct and prepped to get into the engagement phase. So for those of you that have the Kaiser, I hope you're being as creative as you possibly can with it. We do a lot of different activations with it. So what we actually like to do with this here is, we're now using this as the band. My arms down, diagonal, and so with that isokinetic, it really gives me a good idea of what's happening. So Matt, your hand's going to go right where that mark is, right there. You're going to reach in, you're going to grab that. Now, what else I really like about this movement is I get to see what's going on in the scap here for our throwing athletes. Let me move that way. Okay. So nice pull. There you go. See how he set that lumbar spine? That was great. Go ahead, hit it. Who's your daddy? Go ahead, again. Good. So can you hold it? Push, hold. Okay. Now tell him, raise it up a little bit. Everything's staying neutral here. Looks good. No kyphosis. Not really cheating with anything. He's got his obliques engaged and back. Good. All right. So anyway, that is basically an explanation of the activation phase. Those were a few examples of some of the movement prep we do during the activation frame here. Add it to your methodology. Maybe you don't agree with it, whatever. I love that we're getting comments. I love that there's a forum. I love that people are engaging, no pun intended, with this series. I promise you. Some of the other questions were, when are you getting to the ground reaction force series? I promise you, I will get to the ground reaction force series after we cover activation, engagement, and ignition, and then we'll spend time in that ground reaction force series addressing everything from how it serves, create bar on lend to simple movements, through agility, through speed, your positive velocity, negative acceleration. We'll hammer away at that. Please, email us. Ask us questions. I don't know everything, okay? I always say, I don't have all of the answers, but I most certainly will provoke thought. So until next time, this is Coach Massey here from M2 Speed, Strength, and Performance, Massey Machado Strength and Conditioning, with another episode of Move Your Feet. Greatness is forged, not fabricated. That's your day.